All right, so we have quite a bit to talk about in this video. We have so much to cover. This is of such importance that we needed to put this video out today. So what we're going to do in this video, we're first of all going to talk about some of the things that the government, that the Fed are likely going to be doing in the coming days and in the coming weeks in order to attempt to combat this recession that we are going to be entering. I think at this point, it's quite obvious that we are going to be entering into a recession in the coming months here. You know, if you ask somebody a few weeks ago whether this is going to happen, it was very debatable. Most people would say, no, we're not entering into a recession if you ask them in January and February. But today in mid-March, things are quite different. So we're going to discuss all of that in this video. Then we're going to talk about some monetary policy, fiscal policy, more things that the government's going to be doing to hopefully try to alleviate some of this pressure, but also, most importantly, things that you and I can do to protect ourselves in an environment where it might be a little bit contractionary. We might see the unemployment rate likely increase quite a bit in the coming weeks, in the coming months. So some things that you want to do, some precautions as well, all of that in this video. So if you're new here to the channel, make sure you subscribe for more videos like this. I don't want this channel to become entirely based on the stock market and on the economy. We make plenty of other videos related to personal finance and lifestyle videos as well. So consider subscribing to the channel. I would highly appreciate it. And let's get started here with this video. Now, one of the first things that I need to open with here is something that I hear so many people saying, and I want to just clear this up here. People have told me many times in the past 48 hours, they say, Nate, this time it's different. This time it's different. The markets are going down to zero and I'm going to lose all my money. And we're at a position now where we are going to be entering into the Great Depression, the next Great Depression. We haven't had one in 100 years, and we're entering into a Great Depression. Now, I just want to touch on this very briefly because maybe I was a weird kid. When I was in college, I would go to my library at Penn State and I would look at all of the newspapers from the past 100 years and look at all of the different financial crises that we would have in 2008, in the early 2000s, after the dot-com bubble in 1987, looking at all of these different recessions. And if you look at these newspapers and you look at the columns and things that people are writing in there, everybody was saying the same thing. They would say, this time it's different. After the dot-com bubble, this time is different. After the financial crisis, this time is different. 1987, this time it's different. We're going down to zero. The markets will never, ever recover. And I just want to remind people that at some point in the future, it might be years from now, it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years from now or longer, the markets will recover. So if you're sitting here watching this video now and you have quite a bit of money in your 401k or your retirement plans and you're very worried about this, just remember that at some point, especially if you're not planning on using this money for a long period of time, and as long as you didn't put all of your money into Norwegian cruise stock, then your money will likely recover at some point. Now, personally, I'm not planning on using the money that I have in my retirement funds for, well, let's see, I'm 21. I have probably another 40 years until I'm going to be tapping the money from those accounts. So because of that, I'm not entirely worried about this. I know a lot of people have been concerned that they've lost quite a bit of money in the past few weeks, but I just want to remind people that I'm in this for the long term. I think a lot of us are in this for the long term, and to keep your head held high through this. Now, another quote that you've likely heard me say many times in the past on this channel is from Warren Buffett, and he states that it's important to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. And this is why in times of economic uncertainty, a lot of people are running far away from investments, from the stock market, but this could actually be a time of opportunity. And so I urge people who maybe if you haven't really invested in the past before, or you've always been intrigued in investing, but the markets have been at all-time highs like they were about 6 weeks ago, I urge people to maybe learn a little bit more about investing. Pick up some investing books. Start to look for deals in the markets with these markets down about 30% or more. And I urge people to do that. So if you're interested in investing, we do have some other videos on the topic, but the best way, I've had so many people ask me this and message me, Nate, what's the best way to learn how to invest? Read books. It's the absolute best way to do it. Pick up a dozen books from your library, or well, maybe you should just get audiobooks at this point. I probably don't want to go to your library, or order them on Amazon, and you can learn quite a bit just from that. Now, we actually made a video about 6 weeks ago on this channel where I discussed some potential risks for a recession. Now, at the time, the video did not do well whatsoever. I got about 40,000 views on that video, which performed very poorly. I believe it was 10 out of 10 from my last videos. Performed absolutely terrible. But I would actually suggest going back and watching that video. We talked about some potential black swan events like the coronavirus. Markets at this time were at all-time highs. People didn't really want to watch the video though because we were in prosperous economic times, and nobody wants to think about a recession when the markets are at all-time highs. So just something to think about. I would suggest going back and watching that video at some point. So what we're going to talk about right now is talking about some things that the government and the Fed, or central banks around the world, are likely going to be doing in the coming days, in the coming weeks. Things happen so fast that by the time you're watching this video, something different might have happened. This might have already been implemented in different governments and in different societies around the world, but we're gonna try to cover this as best as possible here. So maybe you've heard a lot of this jargon being thrown around about quantitative easing, or maybe you've heard about interest rates by the Fed, right? We're gonna talk about that here in the coming minutes. So one of the tools that the Fed can use, which is essentially, think about this group of people who can essentially attempt to try to control the economy, to try to smooth out the curve. Now, this doesn't always work, and there's always a lot of controversy around it, but there's a lot of decisions being made very, very quickly because they need to act very quickly. Now, the one thing I will say about this compared to the last financial crisis that we had is that it seems as though the government and the Fed is working much quicker than what we saw happen about 11 or 12 years ago now, where there was a lot slower to actually get to the stimulus packages, a lot slower to actually start to cut interest rates, and it led to a lot of problems. And so I think at this point, we're being a lot more proactive. Hopefully, we'll see how this video ages. There's always going to be some things that we come out of recessions and we look back and we say, that was a terrible idea. We should not have done that. We should have done more of this. But it's more difficult to do that in the moment, at the time. So one of the things that the Fed likes to do is they'll cut interest rates during recessions, or as soon as the markets start to become unstable and we fear a recession, they're going to cut interest rates. The reason why they do this is because they're attempting to make debt cheap. They want to make borrowing relatively cheap, so that, say you're a business, you're a small business, you need a loan, we're in a recession, you're not doing so well. Well, if interest rates are 10%, if interest rates are 20%, it's going to be a hell of a lot difficult to get a loan as a small business and then try to pay back that loan with high interest rates. So the Fed likes to slash interest rates as low as possible so that it can hopefully stimulate the economy a little bit. Now, the effects of this recently, as they cut them to zero, weren't not that great. And I'll give you a couple reasons why. One of them being that interest rates were already relatively low. So cutting them from a low point to zero, it didn't really do very much. And actually the next day we saw the Dow drop about 3,000 points, which was about 13%, which was the third worst drop in the stock market history in the United States. So it didn't have the best effect by doing that. That's one of the tools that the Fed can use. Not as effective anymore as what it used to be. That's my personal opinion on that. Now, there's also other tools that they use as well. One that you've probably heard is referred to as quantitative easing. Now, some people have other different definitions for this. Some people refer to it as printing money. The Fed is printing money. Now, the problem with quantitative easing, if you don't know what it is, I would suggest just doing a quick Google search. It's a massive rabbit hole that we could go down and talk about for the next 7 hours if you want to. But look, quantitative easing, the problem with it is that it's somewhat uncharted territory. And anytime when there's the unknown, it's going to involve more risk. And so that's why you're going to see some people who are not big fans of quantitative easing, worried about inflation, that it could spike in the future. There's a lot of things that are going to be unknown about quantitative easing. Even though we believe we have a pretty good understanding of it at the moment, you're going to see some controversy around it. Some people don't like it, and for good reason. There certainly are some risks associated with it, but it's just something that you're probably going to be seeing in the news in the coming weeks, talking about quantitative easing, talking about doing the plumbing, and talking about pumping money into the system. Now, that's something that the Fed can do. They have some other tools as well that they work with banks on, but looking at it from the side of fiscal policy. So we have monetary policy, which is mostly going to be the Fed, central banks. Then we have fiscal policy, which is going to be coming from the Congress, coming from the Senate, coming from the president. This is going to be from politicians mostly. And this is going to work through most countries as well. So if you're not in the United States, something very similar to this would likely be going on, where you're going to see probably some stimulus packages, probably $1 trillion stimulus packages or more, getting pumped into the system in the coming weeks, in the coming months. You're probably going to see stimulus packages. What are in these packages? It's very complicated. We've had these in the past. Pretty much every recession in the past we've had. Looking back to the Great Depression, actually, there was far less of this. And I think this is actually one of the reasons why I think it's going to be difficult for us to actually enter into something like the Great Depression. One of the problems with the Great Depression that we had was that everybody was so hands-off. The government, banks were so hands-off to the point where it was almost every man for themselves. And it was to the point where if a bank was failing, if a massive bank was failing during the Great Depression, they were on their own. They had no help from the government. They had very little help from the government. I should correct that. There were some things that the government did to attempt to cool the market off and try to get everybody under control. But the point here is that it was much more laid back, much more laissez-faire, much more extreme free markets to the point where it was every man for themselves. I think in this case today, it's very different. The US government is very willing to step in to try to prop up the economy as much as possible. Just something we want to keep an eye on. Now, in terms of fiscal policy, yes, stimulus packages very likely, but another thing that you're probably going to be seeing, and I saw this just today, we're going to see, probably when you're watching this video, something has come out about this already, so just look this up if you're interested, but likely going to be some type of, well, people refer to this as helicopter money, essentially a universal basic income during this specific time. Now, whether or not you agree with it, the point here that I'm trying to bring is that this is something that is very much on the table. I believe I just saw the Trump administration was talking about it. I saw both sides of the political spectrum, Republicans and Democrats, sort of coming together on some of these ideas. Now, the reason for this, and look, I'm going to be honest, because I had hundreds of people message me in the past 48 hours here telling me, Nate, I lost my job, or I work at a restaurant and my restaurant just shut down. What the hell am I supposed to do? And seeing this many people message me in this short amount of time is very, very concerning. It was actually frightening. It gave me chills to see how many people messaged me this in the past 48 hours, emailing me, messaging me, and saying, Nate, I lost my job, or I'm out of work for at least the next 6 weeks until the state is back up and running. What do I do? How do I save more money? How do I find more money? What should I do? And this is the problem that we're in at the moment with so many people quarantining right now because of this cerveza virus, we're going to call it, so it'll get demonetized here, is so many people are going to be out of work for at least the next few weeks, likely, possibly the next couple of months, most likely. And with that many people out of work, a lot of people, whether or not you have done this yourself, a lot of people have been living paycheck to paycheck. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a long time, hopefully you've built an emergency fund, but a lot of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And so if you are barely making it by before, and now suddenly you have $0 coming in, you still have to pay your rent. And there's tens of millions of Americans who are experiencing this at the moment who can't work remotely because they work in the service industry. They're a car salesman, they are a barber, they're a hairdresser, they're a chef at a restaurant, and suddenly they can't work at all. So this universal basic income is something that is very much on the table. Hong Kong just did this last month. They started to pump in about $1,000 per month for all of their residents. Now, there's certainly going to be some negative externalities coming from this. One thing that I want to bring up, first of all, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? This is coming from somewhere. The money is coming from somewhere, and it's important to remember that. And if we're just pulling money out of thin air and we're giving it $1,000 a month to people and we're just creating this money, this is one of the biggest causes for inflation. So if we're going to be pulling money out of thin air, or if we're going to be pulling it from somewhere or raising taxes, whatever it might be, I'm not quite sure. But whatever it is, just remember that if we are creating more money, it will likely create more inflation. We can try to do some things to combat it, but just keep an eye on that. Inflation in the past for my entire life has been extremely low, a couple percent per year. We're going to see how inflation works in the coming years, but I think we're going to see a lot more fluctuation in that. We could see it climb quite a bit. Just keep a very close eye on inflation and remember that as we go forward. So look, I just want to remind everyone who's watching this video now that things are going to be okay. We're going to get through this. This happens. It's economic cycles. We're going to get through this. There's going to be things we look back on and say, you know, I wish I did that differently. I wish I acted differently. I wish I had my money in this, or I wish I didn't withdraw my money at all-time lows, or, you know, there's going to be a lot of things that happen in the coming weeks, in the coming months. And so it's important to remember that everything's going to be okay. So I hope everybody stays safe, stay healthy, stay indoors. Thanks for watching the channel. Appreciate all the support, everybody. And I'll see everybody probably on Friday. I think we're going to be putting out a few more videos now that we're getting into some times where people are, first of all, working from home a lot more, staying at home a lot more, possibly watching YouTube, and figure, might as well make some more videos. So thanks for watching. Really appreciate all the support, guys, and stay safe. Peace out.